And fast forward 3 days, Ambassador Petrov finally meets Prince Roland, who promptly welcomes him back to the border town. Petrov respectfully pays his regards, saying that the Honeysuckle family has sent their greetings to the prince as well. Prince Roland invites him to sit, and reminds him that the reason for this urgent meeting is something that could affect the entire future of the western region, including Longsong Fortress. Petrov promptly asks him to explain further, so Roland then reveals his grand plan to build a metropolis, which will stretch from the Misty Forest in the west to Longsong Fortress in the east. This metropolis would encompass half of the western region. Since Longsong Fortress would be the eastern half of this new city, it would also become the first line of defense against the church, meaning it would no longer be an independent city as it is now. He further explains that the vast territory will be governed by the same laws and managed by the same bureaucracy. The elite will no longer have any influence in government, not even the 5 great families. Petrov finds all of this absolutely amazing because, a year ago, he had a similar thought about moving their defenses to the border town and utilizing the land between them. But Duke Ryan never made it happen, but the prince is taking it even further. There's no doubt that the prince has already made his decision about this territory expansion, and this is the only reason he's sharing this with Petrov now. No one can stop him at this point, and all Petrov can do is protect his own interests in this grand revolution. With that in mind, Petrov asks him how the Honeysuckle family can help if the 5 families won't be involved in the government. Prince Roland commends Petrov for his quick-witted thinking, saying he has always been impressed by Petrov's insights ever since he accepted the offer to govern the fortress. He appreciates Petrov's positive attitude and acknowledges that these are intelligent qualities he rarely finds in the elite. The prince assures him that as long as the Honeysuckle family continues to serve him, they can manage the Longsong area. Petrov promptly bows his head, saying that he and his father will always follow the Highness's judgment. The prince clarifies that while the Honeysuckle family will still have a role in managing their lands, they won't have the same political power as before. From now on, all elites under his rule will have land but won't govern it. All laws and regulations will be managed by the city hall. He further states that land can be inherited just like elite titles, and the Honeysuckle family will tend to their own crops, workshops, and other businesses. These will all belong to the Honeysuckle family, and no one else will be allowed to intrude on their property. That's his promise. He reassures Petrov that their land won't change, except for the fact that they will have to follow government laws, which may even allow them to flourish more. The prince also tells him that he can return to his own territory and continue the traditional feudal system. However, once he completes the constitution for his new city and starts expanding, that land will no longer belong to its current owner. Once the meeting is over and Petrov is gone, Nightingale pops up, asking if Petrov will even accept this arrangement. The prince replies that he doesn't know. Petrov's agreement alone won't be enough. He'll also need to convince Duke Holmes, and if Holmes wants to remain a feudal elite, there's not much anyone can do about it. Nightingale asks if Petrov convinces Duke Holmes, then Petrov will be the one governing the capital. The prince starts discussing all the political implications and the changes that will come after he unifies Grey Castle. Everything goes over Nightingale's head. She cuts him off, saying there's no need to explain since she can't understand this stuff anyway. Instead, she mentions that a new witch is coming soon, and she's heading out for investigations. The prince asks if she's going alone, and she replies that she'll have Wendy with her since she's better at this kind of stuff than she is. The prince smiles and says he'll leave it up to them then. Apparently, Nightingale needs to verify every new witch who arrives at the border town. Since the new witches have to remove the Stone of Divine Judgment for Nightingale's mist to determine their truthfulness, the prince can't be present in case anything goes wrong. Scroll came up with 10 different identity questions for Nightingale to ask. Since Nightingale can only tell if someone believes what they're saying, the questions have to be straightforward without any loopholes. Even if a witch manages to lie once or twice, they wouldn't be able to deceive her with all the questions. Suddenly, the old man Barov bursts into the scene, frantically asking the prince if it's true that he's recruiting witches at the rate of 1 golden royal per month. The prince agrees right away, explaining that witches are being paid the highest, making it literally the best-paying job in this age. The old man suggests that if the prince wants witches, he should ask the people to find them, just like when he asked them to expose spies. He argues that the people have the sharpest eyes, and they can be rewarded for their efforts. The prince reminds him that this approach isn't much different from what the church is doing. He hopes the witches will come willingly, and that they can continue to use their own power. You see, issuing rewards for witches might create a frenzy around them, and people could start treating it like a business. That's when Wendy appears and says they've verified the new witch's identity, and she exactly matches Ambassador Petrov's description. The prince reminds how he knew too much caution was unnecessary, but Wendy responds that it's necessary because his personal safety is their top priority. The prince then tells her to bring the girl in, and they quickly usher the little timid girl into the room. Wendy reassures her not to be afraid and introduces her to Prince Roland. As soon as the prince sees her, he can tell she must be panicking inside, since she is in a completely unfamiliar place. So adapting to a new life might take her a long time. After all, she's just a little girl who doesn't have Agatha's intellect or Anna's tenacity. Even Moon and Lily had each other as sisters for support. He then tells Wendy that there's no need to test the girl's abilities just yet. He suggests she should get used to this new, unfamiliar place first. Wendy decides to give the little lady a well-deserved bath, and she'll be staying at the witch branch for now. Later, we find ourselves in a steamy bath scene, where Wendy is gently giving a warm shower to this timid girl. Wendy reflects on how taking care of new witches has practically become part of her job, something the prince specifically assigned to her, especially since she's good at comforting others. She had felt a bit sad not having any witches to take care of for a while, but now she's happy she can be a big sister to someone again. She then notices how skinny this child is, but she is relieved that she is a witch, and with some proper nutrition, she'll bounce back to normal soon enough. Wendy checks the water temperature to see if it's not as hot anymore. She helps the little girl step into the bath, and as soon as she does, the kid feels a shiver run down her spine. But pretty quickly, she starts to chill out as she gets used to the warm water. Wendy begins to rub the girl's back and asks Paper when she awakened as a witch. The girl replies that it was 2 years ago, back in winter. Wendy smiles and says that's pretty common since most witches wake up during the months when demons are out and about, and it's said that magic is at its strongest then. The little girl asks if that means they have devil powers. Wendy, being the big sister, corrects her and tells her that this is absolutely not true. Being a witch is totally normal. The only real difference between witches and mortals is that we have amazing powers. She adds that a few hundred years ago, witches were considered the children of God. She further assures her that having magic is as natural as breathing. The girl asks if her powers will grow. Wendy agrees and says they'll definitely get stronger as she gets older, but she'll need to work hard to control the energy. Otherwise, she might go through anti-phases, and the church uses this to spread lies about witches being possessed. The girl looks pretty down about it. Wendy realizes that since it's her second year of awakening, she probably felt some of that awakening pain last year. To cheer her up, Wendy reassures her that now that she's in the border town, everything will be all right. She explains that if she hurries and starts practicing, this year's awakening day will be a piece of cake, and everyone will be there to support her. Suddenly, Lily bursts into the bathing room, super excited to see the new witch. She says Moon wants to see her too, but Moon claims Lily is the one who wanted to check her out. The girl panics when she sees them and sinks deeper into the bathwater. Wendy quickly reassures her that they're just fellow witches, so there's nothing to be worried about. Lily asks the girl about her powers, and she replies that she can melt snow. Lily follows up, asking if she can also turn water into ice. The girl shakes her head, saying she can only make hot water cold. When Wendy hears this, she perks up, realizing that while melting snow means raising the temperature, cooling hot water lowers it. But since she can't change normal water's temperature, it doesn't sound quite right. Lily places a steaming tub of hot water in front of her and tells her to give it a try. As soon as the girl uses her ability, the water starts to cool down, and the steam disappears right away. The bubbles in the water also vanish, and the movement of the water slows, creating a clear surface. All the witches are left wondering what kind of power this is. Before we can learn anything about this magical ability, the scene transitions to the prince's office, where Petrov is preparing to leave for Longsong Fortress. Before heading out, he pays his respects to the prince and promises that the honeysuckle family is ready to serve him. Petrov also assures the prince that he'll convince his father, and he will definitely listen since he is different than the rest of the elites. The prince is pleased to hear this, while Petrov continues, saying he's witnessed the incredible progress in Border Town. If the new city the prince is aiming to build is as advanced as it seems, the honeysuckle family wouldn't mind joining in, especially if it means they could flourish under the prince's vision. The prince then tells him that his goal is to make every part of Grey Castle a comfortable place for its citizens to live. Petrov bows his head in respect, saying he'll hurry back to the fortress and report this news to his father. The prince reminds Petrov not to forget about the other 4 families and the entire elite class. He promises that any family willing to accept their conditions will be wholeheartedly integrated into the new city. He then instructs Petrov to hold a conference at Longsong Fortress to announce this news to everyone. Petrov is startled by this, but the prince reminds him that he'll be the one delivering this message, as he will take on the role of ambassador. The prince also commends him for doing well in his assignment of recruiting witches, and informs him that the operation will no longer be covert. However, he warns that there are still some people who hold hope for the church, and tasks Petrov with clearing those individuals from the western region. He leaves it in Petrov's hands to figure out how to make it happen. Once Petrov leaves, the prince finally lets out a relaxed yawn and stretches, deciding to take a walk in the garden now that he's done with his office duties. As he steps into the garden, he's immediately startled by the sight of large trees surrounding the area, trees that weren't there before. It feels as if he's standing inside a living organism, with the garden itself almost seeming to breathe. As he walks further in, he spots a cozy bonfire, where Wendy gestures for him to come closer. When he steps inside, he notices other witches gathered there as well. He sits down beside his sister and asks what's going on. Tilly reveals that Sister Leaf's ability has evolved, allowing her to create this entire section of the garden. She has fused with the plants, and everything they see is a part of Sister Leaf herself. The prince is shocked and asks if she is still able to return to her human form. That's when Lady Leaf herself speaks up, and she uses the movement of the leaves to create her voice, saying she can return to normal if she deactivates her ability. The prince is amazed by this and asks how she's able to speak using only the leaves. He then wonders if she can hear them talking. Lady Leaf explains that not only can she hear them, but she can also see, smell, and touch anyone within the garden. She can detect every tiny change, the birds building nests, insects crawling on the bark, and the sensation is something she finds incredibly hard to put into words. Using the flow of air within the garden, she gently hands the prince a flower. Nearby, Andrea is cooking some delicious corn, produced by Sister Leaf's power. The prince curiously asks how she achieved such a remarkable ability. Lady Leaf responds that she's not entirely sure. She continued talking with the animals and plants while practicing her abilities, and then one day, they responded to her summons, and perhaps this is what she's always been searching for, a way to combine the forest life forms together. The prince asks what would happen if she tried this in the misty forest. He wonders if it would become a part of her as well. She replies that she's not sure, and even if she could, it would require a long time. She explains that maintaining this form doesn't require much magic, and the forest can even replenish it. However, every time she expands, her consciousness slows down. She struggles to find the right words, but is certain that if she tries to extend her influence over something as vast as the misty forest, she would surely lose her mind. When she first fused with the garden, she felt that her mind wasn't enough, and that struggle made it hard for her to return to normal. However, she doesn't feel that way when she fuses with plants she's controlled before. She just needs to jog her memory, and it works seamlessly. The prince is fascinated by Sister Leaf's ability. While Lily's evolution was on a microscopic scale, Sister Leaf's breakthrough is on a much grander level. If she could eventually control the entire misty forest, no enemy would be able to hide from her. Wendy congratulates Sister Leaf, expressing how glad she is that the Witch Union now has another evolved witch. This means that half of the association's witches have awakened. The prince points out that Agatha would be absolutely shocked if she were here. He then asks about Paper, and we see the timid young witch trying to hide behind Wendy. Wendy reveals to the prince that Paper's abilities need attention too, as there's something odd about them that they need to figure out. Wendy then snaps her fingers, and 2 cabbages fall from the tree. She picks one up and reveals to the prince that she's teaching Paper how to cycle her magic so she can use it consistently, just like he taught her in the beginning. She explains that Paper's control isn't exactly precise yet, but she's making progress. Wendy opens a hole in the thick woods that are blocking the cold and makes the cabbage she's holding freezing cold. Afterwards, she instructs the little girl to use her abilities on it. As Paper focuses her magic, the snow on the cabbage begins to melt. One of the witches wonders if she's speeding up time, but the prince observes that time is just a concept humans created for measurement. It doesn't actually exist, so he's not sure how Paper is creating that effect. Wendy then ties a rock to a rope and lets it hang from a branch, When Paper uses her ability on it, the rock starts to vibrate frantically. This observation makes Wendy think that if Paper's abilities were related to time, the rock would be swinging slow instead. That's when the prince's mind clicks with the realization that she's not actually affecting time. Instead, she's influencing the movement of atoms, and her magic can either slow them down or speed them up, which results in water freezing or melting. Of course, Paper doesn't really understand the science behind her magic, but she uses it based on her feelings. She thinks her magic doesn't affect other things much other than water, because some changes take time, like when things rust. The prince believes her magic is like a natural helper that speeds up reactions. When he gets back in his office, he thinks that once Paper gets better at controlling her magic, they can make their chemical work even better. They're already making a lot of important acids, and they need to improve their explosives. If they can produce more ammunition, Border Town will easily be able to get new repeating rifles. Suddenly, the prince nearly chokes on his tea when he hears a loud bang outside. Nightingale rushes to go outside, insisting there must be a demon, but the prince warns her to be careful. She reassures him that there's nothing to worry about since they can't touch her once she's in the mist. The prince understands why Nightingale is so eager to go outside. The witches have been feeling cooped up all day because of the winter, especially the battle witches Tilly brought. They've been waiting all day for hybrid demons to fight. He can tell that Andrea, Ash, and Nightingale all want to show off their strength to each other. However, he thinks it would be great if they were this enthusiastic about studying instead. Still, he's glad they have their own kind of fun, especially since support witches don't have that luxury. This is why he's planning to work on a new project to create some fun activities for everyone. Soraya enters the scene, and it looks like she has been called by the prince. He asks her if she's free, and she replies that she's not. A few workers have been going to the factory, so she finished painting the layers in only half a day. Otherwise, she helps Kyle with crafting those metal boxes. She adds that she enjoys her life now much more than during her days in the association in the mountains, and is really happy that her abilities are helping everyone. The prince explains that he called her to help him design some new playing cards. He believes all the witches would appreciate a new pastime since the rules for the previous game were quite simple and the game would be over quickly. He starts designing the playing cards and gives Soraya a basic idea of how they should look. He explains that there will be 4 suits and 13 ranks, with the last 3 ranks being the Jack, Queen, and King. There will also be 2 Joker cards, making a total of 54 cards. Soraya says she understands and will give it a try. Thinking about playing cards reminds the prince of his past life, where playing poker while watching TV was a Chinese New Year tradition. They would play until the firecrackers went off in the morning to welcome the new spring. Unlike traditional mahjong, playing cards are portable and easy to set up, so anyone can play as long as there's a flat surface. There are plenty of ways to play, making it one of the most popular games in the world. He explains that there are lots of games they can play with these cards, but they can start with something simple. He says he'll call Anna over, and she can teach them how to play Do Dizu. The scene transitions to the bustling market of Border Town, where Eileen is torn about whether or not to buy some meat. Her husband Ferlin explains that every piece of meat is priced by weight, so they can't really get a better deal. He asks if this is because she prefers lean meat, but he reminds her that it won't taste as good if there's not enough fat. Eileen replies that the best cut has a decent balance of both lean and fat, making it suitable for frying in a pan. She knows she has to pay attention to pick the best one. As she's selecting the meat, Ferlin decides to grab a bag of flour. As he walks around, someone calls out his name, and we see that Ferlin is quite popular at the market. I guess this isn't surprising since he was the first knight of the Western region after all. Once it's Ferlin's turn to grab the flour, a little girl greets him over the counter, excitedly telling him that she's an official apprentice and currently working in the agriculture department. Ferlin congratulates her and wishes her good luck, then asks for the bag of flour. A guy quickly brings it over and hands it to Ferlin. The little girl flashes a smile and tells him to visit again later. As Ferlin walks away, he notices Agatha. He's surprised to see her because the clothes she's wearing look familiar, which resemble his family's paintings from the past. He is totally flabbergasted as he thinks if she might be an ancestor of his, and how it's possible for his ancestors to be alive. Right at that moment, Eileen enters the scene and looks annoyed to see him staring at another girl. Ferlin is lost in his thoughts while she tries to grab his attention. Finally, she shouts near his ear, asking what has gotten into him. He says he is fine, but his mind still seems to stuck over her. Later, Ferlin arrives at his family home, and as soon as he enters, he encounters his brother Mason. Mason tells him that he doesn't belong to the Eltech family, and asks why he has returned. The big brother further asks if he needs money for the winter. He says Ferlin can have money, but he better leave as soon as possible. But Ferlin makes it clear that he does not want any money or inheritance privileges. He explains that Prince Roland has employed him as a teacher, and he is very satisfied with his life. Mason raises an eyebrow and asks since when he gained scholarly knowledge and if he's teaching other elites. Ferlin clarifies that he's not teaching elites, but rather commoners. This shocks Mason, who points a finger at his lil bro and asks if that peasant wife of his has muddled his mind. Just then, their father arrives on the scene and says that Eileen isn't any worse than elites. She just lacks their identity. Both sons bow in respect as they see their father, who looks like a big bearded hobo. He mentions that he's heard from the guards that Ferlin has some news, to which Ferlin agrees. His father instructs him to meet in the office. As they walk, their father points out that he saw Eileen in the theater during autumn. He notes that she looked very healthy, and her performance was on par with Miss May. He hopes Ferlin will have an excellent wife in her. That is when we see Agatha's photo, and while Ferlin is looking at her painting, he agrees with his father and mentions that he and Eileen have their own home in Bordertown now. He adds that he's planning to try for a child after the demon months are over this year. The old man then states that the journey must have been tough to come all the way from Bordertown. Once they finally settle in the office, Ferlin reveals to his father that he saw a woman in town who looked identical to their family paintings. Of course, this absolutely boggles the old man's mind. Ferlin further explains that the woman had blue hair and beautiful features. He swears he saw her with his own eyes and wonders if she could be their descendant. The old man dismisses this as impossible. Ferlin then suggests that he must have misunderstood someone. His father agrees, saying it's impossible for her to be a descendant, but she might be the woman in the painting herself. This idea strikes Ferlin as even more ridiculous because how could she possibly be alive after hundreds of years?